Welcome everyone to lecture 8 of ZOO. Let me get myself out of there. ZOO 3649. We are continuing with Darwin's idea of natural selection. We spent a couple of lectures on this now, and I've spent a couple of lectures on this because I want to build up the idea of natural selection as the big idea in biology. And what we're coming to in the second half of this is Mr. Mendel's idea, right? The other big idea in biology, which is inheritance. We're going to be spending this whole section on these two big ideas, okay? And the next section, we're going to put those ideas together. So, we're talking about natural selection. And remember, Darwin's idea fulfills all of what we've learned in human thinking, including testing, hypothesis testing, right? So, in order to test a hypothesis of natural selection, you have to be able to measure natural selection. In order for a scientist to say there is something is existing, what do you have to do? You have to measure it. So if I say that we have different heights, I can say it, right? You can see, yeah, prof, you are definitely not the same height as me. I'm not the same height as others. Yes, we have differences in height. But until you actually go with a ruler or tape measure and measure each and everyone's height, you don't have any numbers, anything in your hand, real things, to show that there is differences in our heights. Okay? You need to measure it for it to become real. That is the difference between fiction and reality. Okay? If you can't measure it, it's not science. It's fiction. Okay? You can believe that, but when it comes to the real world, you will not be able to defend it in an argument because you can't measure it and you can't compare it to something else. That's the problem with fiction. Make believe. Stories. Okay. The difference between something which is real and something which is not real is something which is not real cannot be measured. Okay? And if it can't be measured, you can't believe in it because it's absurd to believe in something which can't be measured. No? Right. So we can't just say there's natural selection. Believe us. That would be ignorant. No. We are saying there is natural selection and we can measure it. So once we can measure it, it's real. Okay? That's why we know that this is real. This is a fact. Can be measured. Okay? Always, when you are confronted with nonsense, and you want to know among this nonsense, what is a fact? It's the thing that can be measured. Okay? That's the fact. Right. So on with the lecture. The way to measure natural selection is fitness. And we are going to go through the ways to measure all of our forces of evolution. There are four, right? Selection is the one we deal with always first. And how do we measure it? We measure it with fitness. And we give fitness a W sign and not a F. Why don't we give it an F? I think those of you who are really, really clever and who have been through the course guide already have seen, and that will come in the lectures in the next section, we have something called F statistics. FST, FIS. Those are why we don't use F for fitness. Okay? Because F is already used for other things in genetics. All right. So that's why we don't use an F to say we use a W. But fitness is a way to measure natural selection. You are going to have to be able to tell me that measuring the effective population size is a way to measure genetic drift. Measuring the mutation rate is a way to measure mutation, and measuring the migration rate is a way to measure migration. So these four forces of evolution are not just something we come up with and we say, believe us or else. No. We don't care whether anyone believes us. Fact is fact. You can measure it. It's real. And it doesn't really matter what anyone else says. It's real. Okay? Measure it. It's real. Can't measure it, not real. Okay? So evolutionary fitness is an important concept of biology, right? Because natural selection is an important concept of biology. All right? We can measure the influence of selection on an individual, or more correctly, on that individual's genotype. Okay? And that measure, okay, is fitness. Okay? It is a measurement of the effect of selection on a genotype. Okay? So we can define fitness in different ways, but the one I like, the simple one I like, is the number of offspring that an individual produces that survive the struggle and are able to reproduce themselves. Okay? So it's not enough. Fitness, having a high fitness, is not enough to just survive the struggle. You have to mate and you have to have kids. That is when you can say, my fitness is high because I've passed my genes to the next generation. Okay? Unless you do that, don't talk about fitness. You don't have any. Okay? So now you are saying, okay, fine, but prof, what if I have a child when I'm 20? And then I have another child when I'm 30, and then I have another child when I'm 40. When do we measure the fitness? If I measured it early in your life, I will say you had one child. And I will have what? An incorrect measurement of your fitness. Why? Because the truth is you've had 3. So what do we have to accurately measure fitness? What do we have to do? Fitness has to be measured throughout the lifetime of an individual or an organism, whether it is a tree or a cockroach or a human, right? Fitness has to be measured over a long time. Because why? You can have many kids over your life. I want to know what your total fitness is. That means I must wait until you are dead. Then I will see how many kids you had for sure. And then I will be able to tell how many of them survived. And then that will be your fitness, right? So the fitness is basically the contribution of an individual or a genotype of an individual to the future generation, but the average lifetime contribution, because it's measured over the organism's life, right? In terms of the numbers, the fitness can go from 0 to 1, okay? So your fitness of 0 means what? Either you didn't survive to become an adult, or even if you did survive to become an adult, you didn't have kids. And your kids, if you had kids, maybe they died before they could have kids of their own. So that would mean if that happens to you, all your kids, you have a fitness of 0, right? Whereas on the other hand, if you have some offspring that survive, you have some offspring that survive, your offspring grows up, the offspring of you has offspring of their own, then you can say, then you can calculate your fitness based on how many kids you've put to the next, how many genes of your own have you put to the next generation. Okay, so there you go. That means that a fitness of 1 means that you are successful in passing 100% of your genes on average, and the opposite is true for fitness of 0. So because diploid organisms only pass on half of their genes to each child, they must have at least 2 offspring to have a fitness of getting close to 1. Okay? So, fitness. What are the 2 things that influence an organism's genotype's fitness? Okay? What is influencing fitness? There are only 2 things. We've already told you about them. They are surviving to get to an adult stage, and secondly, having kids, right? How many kids are you having? So those are the only things, those 2 things that affect your fitness. Okay. So the probability and average, right, when you think about probability, which is in the first statement, and average, what are we referring to? The probability of surviving. If you're only one, I can't work out your probability of surviving because you're only one. There must be others around. And I can then say, your probability is higher or lower than the average, right? Or than that one's. So you have to have many to have a probability. What about an average? The same, right? If I have just one, if there's one individual, just me, no population, no other individuals, can I have an average height? Can I have an average number of children? If there's only one, you can't have an average height if you have only one. You have to have others, and you have to measure all their heights, and then you divide by the number you measured by. That's an average, right? So for both, for fitness, to measure fitness, I'm saying is that you can't measure fitness just on one person or an individual. You have to measure it in a set of individuals, a population of individuals. Okay? So that means the fitness is usually relative to other members of the population. So I can say, you have a higher fitness compared to the others, or you have a lower fitness compared to the others, right? So fitness is most often comes as this relative fitness, okay? So your fitness in terms of the others, okay? What is your fitness compared to the others in your population? So what is your fitness relative to the others in your population? That is why we have this. Fitness usually comes to you as relative fitness, okay? So it's fitness with the W, or fitness with the bar on top of it, okay? That's the way to measure fitness in a population. And I want to show you the slide. It's quite an interesting slide in that on the x-axis you have relative fitness, okay? When you have a relative fitness, and this is fitness of a genotype, okay? It can also be a fitness of an individual, okay? But we prefer to say, we define the individual by its genotype. Say big A, or big A, small a, or small a, small a. That's the genotype of an individual, right? So prefer to refer to the genotype and what is the fitness on that genotype. So if you have a very high, and so of course on the y-axis is the amount, okay? If the y-axis goes high, that means there's lots of them. If the y-axis goes low, that means there's few of them, right? So on the x-axis, you've got relative fitness, which is going from 0 to, here is 1, right? So on the low side, close to 0, these mutations here, okay, are you see how high it is? They occur very often. These mutations have a negative effect on fitness. Why? Because they're lethal mutations. They could be a frame shift mutation, change the meaning of the gene, change the amino acid, a non-synonymous mutation, and that messes up everything. Or a deletion, or an insertion, frame shift change. Yeah, protein completely gets destroyed. You know how these work. We've been through this in 2544. Okay, so you need to be clued up on what kinds of mutations and what their effects are. Now, we have a lot of these lethal mutations, but they are very low fitness, which means what? Which means that they are usually taken out of the population quite well, okay? Selection is easy, relatively easy to get them out of the population, because why? If you have this one, you die, okay? If you have these alleles, you die, right? It's a lethal mutation. Then, as relative fitness gets higher, right? There are other mutations which do not affect fitness. They are mutations that don't have a fitness. In other words, natural selection doesn't happen to these mutations. They don't feel the effects of selection because maybe they are part of the DNA that is not coding for a gene. They could be microsatellite, which doesn't have a fitness. There's no fittest number of microsatellite alleles or fittest microsatellite alleles. Microsatellites do not have any fitness. They are neutral. So big parts of the genome are neutral or nearly neutral, and we'll get to that. Neutral simply means there's no selection. There's no fitness. We'll get to the neutral theory and in another section of this module, okay? But for now, you can see that mutations with a higher fitness, okay, slightly higher fitness, can actually not be fit, if you know what I mean. So you can have a high relative fitness, okay? Well, high average. It's, as you see here, it's approaching the average. But these mutations here don't actually have a fitness. They simply drift along. That's where the term genetic drift comes in. They drift along in the population, okay? And they persist in the population because why? There's no selection on them to get rid of them. Right. But on this side here of this peak, you have much higher fitness. And these are the mutations which are not so common. They are fewer. You see, they're not as common as these lethal mutations. Most mutations are lethal. These mutations here, they're becoming less and less common, actually, until you get to very high fitness and you say almost none of those mutations are existing. Yeah? And these are the advantageous mutations. These are the mutations that increase your fitness, allows you to survive the struggle, allows you to outcompete the other people to reproduce. Okay? Those are your advantage mutations. And this is basically mutations and the frequencies graphed as a function of their relative fitness. Okay, and for our last slide, you've seen this before, you've seen this slide before, and I want to say, just from third year point of view, let's talk about the fitness of these different, well, we can call them genotypes, but we can call them also traits. So in this situation, stabilizing selection, which is the first one, what is the fitness here? The fitness basically of the extremes is very low. So if you belong in these extremes, the chance that you go to the next generation, survive the struggle, plus reproduce, is actually quite small. Okay, quite a low chance. Whereas, and so what happens then after generation after generation? No, the extremes on either end are lost, and you only have all the individuals in the population have stabilized around the mean. Okay, that's what's called stabilizing selection. So the individuals who have extremes have less fitness. The individuals in near the median, near the mean, have a higher fitness, and that's why they become more common as generation continues. What about directional selection? This is supposedly the selection that caused that selection is most is the one that causes most of the advantageous changes that we see, like the advantageous mutations that we saw in the previous slide. They usually give you directional selection because they push the mean in a certain direction. Okay, here the mean does not get pushed. The mean starts off there and it actually remains there. It's stabilized. Whereas here the mean starts off here. And what is happening to the mean? Because the small ones, so the short ones in terms of height, are getting nailed so they don't have a high fitness. The ones with higher height have a higher fitness. So what happens? This curve, every generation, it moves in this direction. It moves to the higher end. It moves, the average gets higher and higher and higher. So it's moving in a direction. The mean moves in a direction. That's what's called directional selection. So one extreme has a low fitness and the others have a high fitness. And diversifying selection is also a very interesting selection. It's telling you that the mean has the lowest fitness, right? These guys here in blue along the mean have the lowest fitness. The ones on the extremes have a higher fitness. And what's going to happen here? Generation after generation, you'll actually have two means. So this population and this population will slowly be getting more and more and more different from each other, and two populations will come from one. Okay, and that basically means that in blue here are the ones who are unfit. Okay, diversity science selection selects against these ones at the mean. Okay, so against the mean. So if you have an average height, this selection is going to select against you. Okay, so you're going to have a lower fitness. All right, the next lecture we'll talk about evidence for natural selection. It'll be our last lecture. No, it won't. We'll have another lecture after that of artificial selection, a short lecture, and that will end our focus on natural selection.